Hey guys, it's Gregor, and in this video I'm going to be talking about British battleships and what such a line of ships may look like in the game. I know the German battleships are soon upon us, but I thought that to pass the time I'd talk about another set of very popular battleships designed by Germany's main enemy in the Atlantic. At the start of World War I, this nation commanded the largest navy in the world and did a great deal of heavy lifting in terms of naval warfare during that time with its battleships. And even during the Second World War, Britain kept a respectable amount of battleships that survived throughout its course, and they made the last battleship to ever be constructed. The Brits often favored highly accurate guns with high-velocity rounds that could penetrate most targets they came across. Notable in this is Britain's usage of 14-inch guns for a good deal of their battleships during the Second World War, rather than the 16-inch guns that were commonly used at the time. Some felt that the vessel would have been better off with larger caliber guns, but it still fared very well. You may have seen my general British tech tree speculation video. This time we're going from Tier 3 to Tier 10 individually for a drafted line. Please note that there were tons and tons of British battleships made over the course of the Royal Navy's history, and as such, some ships that may seem like obvious choices to you may have flown completely over my head. I tried to find the most notable ships I could to incorporate into this drafted line. Let me know what you think of it, and if you have any suggestions. Also note that I'm referring to gun calibers in inches, since that was how the Brits designated them themselves. Tier 3, HMS Dreadnought, commissioned 1906. HMS Dreadnought created the demand for the Dreadnought class of battleship, effectively making every other form of battleship built before it obsolete, now categorized as pre-Dreadnought ships. It made every naval engineer in the world immediately change their strategy in regards to designing warships, and it was the flagship of the Home Fleet 4th Battle Squadron during the First World War. It's also the only battleship known to have sunk a submarine, ramming German sub U-29 in 1915. What made Dreadnought such a big deal was her usage of a uniform main battery, a large set of high-caliber guns supplemented by a secondary battery of smaller ones, instead of the inverse. She was also powered by steam turbines and was the fastest battleship in the world at the time of her completion, for what it's worth. Anyway, statistics. Survivability would understandably be pretty good. Dreadnought would have a belt reaching 279mm in thickness, with considerably tough turret and deck armor reaching 305 and 76mm respectively. Armament, 5 twin turrets, 12 inchers, mounted with 3 along the center and a wing turret on each side. Secondary battery consists of 27 single-mounted 3-inch guns, max speed 21 knots. So I think HMS Dreadnought would serve as an excellent introduction to the British battleship line and to battleship gameplay in general. Moving on. Tier 4, HMS Orion, commissioned 1912. Orion was the first so-called super dreadnought ever built. Notable for the Brits in that she strayed away from the usage of wing turrets. Instead, it had its guns placed all along the center line like the American South Carolina class. Orion also marked the departure from 12-inch main guns to the higher caliber 13.5-inch guns. The careers of the 4 commissioned Orion-class warships were relatively short, participating in the Battle of Jutland in 1916, but all being put out of service due to the Washington Naval Treaty. As for stats, armor would be average for a Tier 4 battleship, 305mm for the main belt. Her armament would consist of 5 twin-barreled turrets, mounting the 13.5-inch guns that I mentioned earlier, that can all be fired broadside. Secondary armament would consist of 16 single-mounted 4-inch guns, and maneuvering-wise, nothing special, still with a top speed of 21 knots. But still a reasonably powerful Tier 4 battleship. Let's move on. Tier 5, HMS Iron Duke, commissioned 1914. The Iron Duke class of warship was essentially an upgraded version of the King George V class of 1912 that came after the Orion class. These ships had improved survivability in addition to incorporating more powerful secondary guns in the form of 6-inchers rather than 4-inchers. At the outbreak of World War I, these were Britain's most powerful battleships, and all 4 of them saw an extensive amount of service. The ship would have a 305mm belt like her preceding ships in the line, with a large amount of turret armor as well at 280mm. Main armament, 5 twin turrets mounted with 13.5-inch guns, and 12 6-inchers for her secondary battery. Iron Duke also had AA guns, although only 2 of them, 3-inch cannons. Speed, also 21 knots. At this point, things might seem to get a little boring. 21 knots, 305mm of belt armor, 5 sets of main guns, but it does get a little more interesting at mid-tier and onward. Tier 6, HMS Queen Elizabeth, commissioned 1914, shortly after the Iron Duke class. Queen Elizabeth class battleships are considered super dreadnoughts as well as fast battleships. They mark another significant change in British battleship design, as they were armed with considerably powerful and high-caliber 15-inch guns. The vessels saw service in both World Wars. HMS Warspite, in particular, retains a record for long-range target hit with a warship's main battery, and exists in-game as a premium ship at Tier 6, so it's only logical that the flagship of this class sits at the same tier. The belt gets a little beefier with 330mm of belt armor, retaining considerably tough turrets of comparable toughness. Main armament, 4 twin-barreled turrets mounted with 15-inch guns, which is considerably high caliber. Only the Bayern would match it in terms of that in-game at that tier. Secondaries, 16 6-inch guns with 2 3-inch cannons serving as AA weapons. Speed, 24 knots. Faster than the Bayern, thus considered a fast battleship at the time of her making in World War I, and fittingly would be the fastest battleship in the game at this tier. So that's HMS Queen Elizabeth, but things would get really interesting afterwards. Tier 7, HMS Nelson, commissioned 1927. So this is the first interwar period ship of the line, and considerably unique at that. Drawing upon how the French built their battleships Dunkirk and Richelieu, these ships were unique in the fact that the main armament was carried forward of the bridge. I imagine this would give Nelson a reasonably good forward firing angle for all her main guns, but that doesn't mean that she'd be able to fire them all in a straight line. The back turret wouldn't be able to do so. Still, this was a considerably powerful battleship class that enjoyed a long service record. Armor, 356mm for her belt, and 406 for her turrets. Main armament, 3 triple-barreled turrets mounting 16-inch guns. Secondaries consisted of 12 6-inch guns, and her AA suite consisted of a plethora of weapons, including 6 120mm cannons, 48 2-pounders, 16 40mm, and 61 20mm. Speed was considerably good for a ship of this type at 23.5 knots. She also had room for a ferry, flycatcher, floatplane. The design of these ships changes considerably once more following Nelson. Tier 8, HMS King George V, commissioned 1940. I placed this ship at Tier 8 this time upon further inspection at the characteristics of her gun's capabilities. Anyway, meet Britain's first World War II era battleship, a considerably powerful and feared piece of work. 5 of these vessels were built with only the loss of 1 over the course of the war, and one of them, Duke of York, was responsible for sinking the German battleship Scharnhorst in 1943, with lead ship King George V and Howe being sent to the Pacific to fight the Japanese. Anyway, armor consisted of 370mm for her main belt with considerably tough turrets, once more at 324mm. Armament, while the caliber would be lower than her counterparts, is still considerably good when gun penetration and velocity is concerned. Her 14-inch guns were arranged in a unique manner, with 1 quadruple-barreled turret and 1 dual-barreled turret at the front, and another quadruple-barreled turret at the back. Speed, very very good for a Tier 8 battleship at 28.3 knots, and it had room for a double-ended catapult that could launch the Supermarine Walrus Scout seaplane. This is a powerful warship that I think would deserve its place at Tier 8. Alright, let's finish up the video with the final tiers of this tree that I think could be done with a particular paper ship. Tier 9, Lionglass. Blind commission, late 1930s, early 1940s. The Lion-class battleships were a planned set of 6 warships that were never constructed in full, basically larger, improved versions of the King George V battleships. Except this time they'd be armed with 16-inch guns. 2 of these ships were laid down before World War II began in 1939, and a third was ordered during the course of the war, but the construction of these ships was ultimately suspended. There were a couple different variations of this design on paper. What I'd place at Tier 9 would be the 1942 design. Armor, 381mm for its main belt and the gun turrets. Main armament, 3 triple-barreled turrets with 16-inch guns. Secondaries, 8 twin-barreled 5.25-inch dual-purpose guns, which, in addition to lots and lots of 2-pounders, would serve as the AA suite. Speed, considerably fast like other World War II-era designs, 28.25 knots, and that's about the extent of the information regarding it. Now let's talk about the final warship. Tier 10, Lion-class, 1944 design. I'm just gonna go for the stats. 381mm of belt and turret armor. Armament, 3 triple-barreled 16-inch guns for the main battery, with 12 twin-barreled 4.5-inch dual-purpose guns, also incorporated into the AA suite alongside 60 planned quad Bofors guns. Speed, 29 knots. A very battleshipy battleship. I think the Lion class of battleships are ultimately the only vessels that Britain has available for tiers 9 and 10. HMS Vanguard is often brought up, but I think it'd be more suited as a tier 8 premium ship, honestly. But let's talk about it, huh? Tier 8, HMS Vanguard. Commissioned 1946. The biggest, fastest, and last of the Royal Navy's battleships, as well as the last battleship ever launched in the world. Noteworthy, but the ship never saw combat. It was put out of service in 1960, as the age of the battleship by then was certainly long past. You can see why I think this ship's better off at Tier 8 when I mention the stats. Armor, 356mm for her belt, with 330mm of turret armor. 4 twin-barreled turrets with 15-inch guns. 8 twin-barreled turrets with 5.25-inch dual-purpose guns, and those will also be incorporated into the AA suite with 10 sextuple, 1 twin, and 11 single-mounted 40mm Bofors AA guns. I think Vanguard would be a proper Tier 8 premium ship that could fight well against its contemporaries like Tirpitz, and adding her due to her interesting history, as the last battleship ever made, is interesting enough. And that's the case for British battleships. Britain's history with battleship design is interesting, especially when you consider that the Royal Navy had to fight against the most fearsome of the Axis war machines, from the German battleship Bismarck to the Italian Littorio class, and to many Japanese designs. Britain made itself stand out as a great naval power then, and I'm looking forward to fielding these fast and accurate designs of the Royal Navy someday when they're added to World of Warships. But for now, we got the Germans, and I promise you, I will be talking about those extensively. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe for more videos like this, and give the video a like, as it really does go a long way. Until next time, I'm Gregor. Thanks so much for watching.